Hello, everyone. Thank you for choosing to attend this session, the DEI-OER framework, ensuring OER relevancy and sustainability on your campus. My name is Eddie Watson. I'm the Associate Vice President for Curricular and Pedagogical Innovation at the American Association of Colleges and Universities, also known as AAC&U. I'd like to introduce my close colleague, Lisa. Lisa, tell everyone about yourself.
Hi, Lisa Petrides here, CEO and founder of ISKME, which is the Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management and Education. Thank you, Eddie. So glad to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So ISKME and AAC&U have been collaborating on really a framework to connect DEI and OER really for change agents on campus. So we'd like to talk a little bit about sort of like what we see as maybe a real challenge that exists currently on campuses, and then our approach to developing a tool that will specifically address this challenge. We're going to also highlight a couple of case studies that kind of exemplify how this work is being done well, a couple places within the US. And then we're going to do a brief introduction to our emerging framework. We're currently calling it the OER DEI framework, but we want to share some of the strategies that are emerging from our work. So a little bit more about what we see as the perceived challenge here. So, when you look at most campus OER initiatives, regardless of institution type, they're generally aligned with the goals that you hear also articulated regarding DEI on campuses. However, beyond sort of those kind of loose connections and maybe some connections around affordability, there really aren't tight connections between OER efforts and DEI efforts, policies and initiatives and the like. Now, this isn't true on every campus, but the vast majority of campuses, this indeed is the truth. And so part of this is exacerbated by reporting lines and organizational structures. They sometimes create barriers where people just aren't necessarily institutionally set up to work together that often. But as a result, there are some really ample and growing opportunities for collaborative co-referencing and co-supporting and integrating campus efforts related to DEI and OER. So we see that as the need and an opportunity to further entrench OER efforts on a campus so that they will persist and grow over time. So Lisa and I work together on this Institute on Open Educational Resources. It's it's a year-long event that the American Association of Colleges and Universities puts on. We're now in our second year. But as we were just starting our first year, we recognized that, wow, we've got these 67 teams, as it turned out, and each team consisted of 5 team members, and we asked teams that applied to be a part of the Institute to bring together a team from diverse areas on campus. So in other words, don't send 5 people from your Center for Teaching and Learning or 5 people from your library, but indeed, someone from the library, maybe someone from IT, someone from the CTL, maybe someone from your provost office, maybe 2 or 3 faculty, depending on how you might want to construct your team. But bring this diverse team together with different reporting lines to engage in a couple of activities in this year-long institute. The first activity is to put together an action plan, like what are your goals? What do you hope to accomplish over the next year associated with OER? And then after you have this action plan, then it moves to enactment. And every team has a national expert that serves as their mentor throughout this experience. So if things don't go as planned, you have someone that you can go to as a consultant to help you move things forward. So within the Institute itself, we have within the curriculum efforts to connect OER and DEI goals. And then we kind of recognize that there will be an opportunity where we can kind of observe what's working well in those efforts across all of these different kinds of institutions. Among those 67 campus teams, we have community colleges and HBCUs and R1s and regionals and small privates, all seeking to extend their OER footprint on campus. But we knew that many of them already had DEI goals. Our curriculum was going to be highlighting DEI. So we reached out to the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and they supported our efforts to document the diffusion strategies that were employed on all of these campuses to connect OER and DEI. So part of our work was to document what strategies were being employed, but then we also wanted to see which were the most successful and which maybe weren't that successful. And so the framework is consisting of the strategies that were found to be used across lots of different institution types and found to be successful across those institution types. So given that we had a full year, we had a range of opportunities to sort of collect data from this population. So we had a range of data sources that we reviewed and scored and interviewed and focus grouped, all those good things. Each team, as it came in, had to have a one-page summary describing its goals initially. Then they moved to create these action plans that we had those documents. We had surveys throughout the year, and we had nested within those surveys some questions that were very specific to the goal of creating a DEI framework. We had focus groups as well that specifically mined deeply into that idea of connecting OER efforts with DEI efforts on campus. There were also final reports. And then, of course, throughout the year, we would hear things that were said in our events. We had 5-day-long events throughout the year. We had webinars. There's a discussion board that was being used by all of the teams. So there were lots of places where other strategies were voiced. And so we were careful to collect those over time. So as I mentioned, there were 67 campuses that provided rich opportunities for us to engage and learn what was actually happening on the ground. And with that background, I'd like to turn it over to Lisa to talk about a couple of case studies we're going to highlight. Lisa, I think you're muted.
Perfect. So what we wanted to do is just really illustrate the ways in which two particular institutions were successful in how they connected their OER and DEI strategies. So I'll go ahead and start with the first one. Go ahead, next slide. So for the first institution, it was a large community college that offered also baccalaureate degrees, over 60,000 students. It was a Hispanic serving institution, and it was 100% commuter school. So you get a sense of the population there. The context in OER prior to the Institute is they had just moved to remote learning in 2020. And that was it provided a very strong impetus for the need to adopt OER and low-cost digital materials. The organization already had a couple of Z degrees in place, and their goals for the Institute participation, not atypically, they wanted to save students money, they wanted to provide access to course materials on the first day of class. But in addition to that, they really they were thinking very carefully about how they close the economic and success gaps for students who couldn't afford the textbooks. So for example, that means less D's, F's, and withdrawals for underrepresented students. And the other, I think, thing that was unique about this institution is that they really had a strong goal of wanting greater level of engagement of a more diverse group of students in the learning process. And they wanted to do that by having more relatable and relevant content. Eddie, next slide, please. So we're going to outline just 3 strategies from each of these institutions as part of this case study to give you a sense and a flavor of what we're seeing. The first strategy was about engaging multiple stakeholders who actively support OER DEI goals. So they created a large OER team that was college-wide, and it included all levels of stakeholders, as Eddie mentioned earlier. It had deans, faculty, leads of online teaching and learning, instructional designers, and librarians. One quote from a participant is that we initially started to come together to create our strategic plan to really incorporate and bring together all of those silos of OER across the campus. And it turned into something bigger, where we were able to create a larger team that was college-wide, and a cross-section of all levels became involved in our committee. Next slide, please. The second strategy that emerged was how important it was to offer professional learning for faculty and leaders. And we know that, well, in this particular case, we saw that both new and veteran faculty were already being trained in DEI. with an emphasis on the importance of letting students see themselves in the curriculum. However, in what was really unique and sort of forward thinking in this is that OER was something that was easily adaptable so that campuses really could adapt their examples to reflect their students. I'm just going to read part of this quote. Diversity and inclusion is part of core competencies for faculty. So when faculty joins, they're exposed to those. But even if they're there for 20 years, there's still additional professional development that needs to focus on diversity, inclusion, and equity. It's not like you do it once and you're there. So one challenge that we're coming up with is that each of these campuses, for example, had a different demographic. And again, they really cited that the ease of OER is that it's adaptable, so each campus can adapt these examples to reflect their students. Next slide, please. Lastly here, this is the strategy to use data and research to monitor and improve OER adoption. So the college had been collecting data from students and from faculty for the past 2 semesters, and they were really using these data to drive their future strategic plans. One participant said, the college is working towards its strategic plan as a whole. So once you get DEI as that tag on the strategic plan, it's going to carry it along, or it's going to carry through all of the work that they're doing so that they can really see the impact that they're having from the use and the adoption of OER. Eddie, do you want to go ahead and talk about the next case study?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit about the context and the institution for case study number 2. So it is a medium-sized community college. It's actually located in the Southwest. It's a HSI, it's a Hispanic Serving Institution, and about 3/4 of the students commute. Regarding OER specifically, they were working on Z degrees across several departments, and they had made really some forward movement by establishing a position for an OER coordinator. So strategies that we saw emerging within this particular context, one was, again, like in case study 1, engaging multiple stakeholders who actively support OER and DEI goals. Their OER leaders were collaborating in a number of different contexts on campus. So they were participating on the DEI committee. They were part of engaging with online learning services and disability support services. And a lot of this was situated within the Center for Teaching and Learning. So that was kind of the umbrella organization for them. And, a couple of key comments that kind of came out of the interviews with this campus, they said that they saw that, working with the committee chair and being with the committee, speaking of the DEI committee, on a regular basis, for them began the process of recognizing that they're actually one and the same, that OER and DEI are really working toward, indeed, identical goals. So being together and working with stakeholders led to realizations like this that then help people recognize that they should indeed be working together. So there's another variant of this particular strategy, engaging across multiple stakeholders. And in addition to working across campus with those that are employed by the institution, they also actively solicited student input on curriculum development and the process of promoting student OER awareness. So a couple of quotes regarding this particular sort of sub-strategy, sub-genre of engaging multiple stakeholders on campus. They said, we get from students more ideas of these pictures that we're using, or these stories or these examples that just don't suit our student population. We bring in the student government. They are informed on what's going on with OER, but they are also giving us feedback on what they need to see on our websites, on OER course descriptions, and how to describe OER, to articulate that to the student audience. So 2 ways to kind of think about multiple stakeholders, not just being colleagues and faculty on campus, but also with students. And then they also engaged in professional development of their faculty and the administration and their leaders. Their district extensively trains faculty on assessing curriculum for bias, inclusivity, and relevancy to students, and creating equitable learning experiences for all. One of the things that they found is that science and math teachers don't always recognize that they need to use this information to apply it to their courses. So just the richness of the case studies that we found across the institutions participating in the Institute provided us with this incredible foundation for creating the framework. Of course, one of the questions you may have at this point is, so that sounds great. When's the framework available? We're actually in the middle of working on it at the moment. We are in the final stretch. We think this calendar year it will be available for everyone. But we did want to provide a glimpse beyond the case studies of what will be within the DEI/OER framework. So we're going to move into sharing some emerging strategies. I don't know, Lisa, do you have any other comments before we talk about the first one?
No, let's go ahead and jump in here. So I think what you'll see is that we selected these 3 case studies to exemplify what we had been seeing as successful strategies, which, as Eddie said, will end up as sort of the basis for this framework, this OER DEI framework that we'll be sharing with you in the next couple of months. So the first strategy, very strong about engaging multiple stakeholders who engage OER and DEI goals. And as we said, that goes from faculty and instructional designers to librarians, financial aid, and the registrar and the bookstore, for example, because everybody has some piece of what OER brings to that transformation process with DEI is really impacting them. Next slide.
Okay, so a second strategy, which isn't necessarily surprising, I think, is the notion of professional development for faculty and leaders. But again, the lens here is about connecting OER to DEI. And so what we found really, I think, intriguing were almost curricular elements or specific outcomes or goals that the campuses were looking for or looking to accomplish specifically around connecting OER and DEI. So some of the things that we saw within this context were to integrative teaching, connecting OER and open pedagogy, training on localization and diversification of content, incorporating DEI actually into the selection, adaptation, and creation of OER. So in other words, nesting it from the beginning of conversations around OER, and also thinking about conversations around accessibility guidelines and accessibility assessment tools in OER professional development. And then also leveraging a number of the other rubrics and frameworks that are out there on the landscape that can help make that connection. So, there's several listed here. My favorite is the ISKME, Identifying Bias and/or STEM Accessibility tool. I'm biased a little bit myself for saying that. But I mean, the Doers Equity through OER rubric, OpenStax has lots of resources. There's lots of opportunities out there to bring in pre-existing tools that can be leveraged to help faculty and administrators make those connections between OER and DEI.
And lastly, the one we have, there's going to be 9 strategies total that will be in this framework. So we're going to just cover these first 3 today. So the third one is around the use of data and research to monitor and improve OER adoption. And this starts from benchmarks and determining measurements as ways to really be able to measure success. And this, of course, includes disaggregating data for students of color and other underrepresented subgroups, and gathering data that link textbook costs with enrollment. This is a major issue that we're seeing across the country. Many of you have experienced this and seen this firsthand, that students who are dropping out are not taking a full course load because they can't afford the cost of the textbooks. And unless we can show these numbers and actually understand what they mean, it's hard to make the case to those who really need to be making these decisions in place about what we're going to do around OER from a policy level and what we're not going to do. Additionally, developing an assessment plan to even identify the areas of impact and areas needing further attention. Again, this is going to be perhaps localized to your institution. It's really looking at this from the goals that you have at the forefront of connecting the OER to DEI, and then looking at really what the desired impact is. And lastly, I can't emphasize enough the importance on really being able to gather the data from the bookstore on what the costs are, what are students actually spending on their course titles, and what are their options Is it hard copy? Is it digital, new, used, renting? We have to really be able to look at things like inclusive access and what these costs are that are not one-time costs, they're ongoing costs. And unless we can, again, compare those and look, very deliberately across OER and versus non-OER impact on students, this is when we're going to see, I think, the strongest impact between OER and DEI and OER adoption generally.
Well, so this was definitely a preview of the emerging framework. And if you'd like to be at the front of the line to hear about it once it's available, definitely feel free to email both Lisa and I. We'd love to hear from you. And hopefully this matches some of your interests and goals and you see how this might be useful on your campus. But again, we anticipate in less than 3 months, this will be publicly available and freely available to the entire community, the entire higher ed community to be able to leverage. So thank you for coming to this session. We're really glad that you chose to be here, and we hope that you find this useful as you continue your work forward.
Thank you.